Thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. Wow, what a group, what a group. So my background, I've been a health and safety professional for a long time, 28 years I think now. And I worked in safety, and then I thought, I was about, 36, 37, what do you do when you're single? And I went off and did a law degree. When I finished my law degree, I thought, I want to stay in safety. I love safety as a profession. I think it's a very interesting space to work in. You're working with people, you're working with lots of different contexts, all that stuff. And in my first year of law, as a junior lawyer, I was sitting in the office and a couple of young builders came to the firm and they were being prosecuted by WorkSafe Victoria for an incident had occurred with a specialist contractor who had been engaged to remove and replace a roof, pretty large project, and in doing that they had removed an air conditioning unit, created a void, and a worker had fallen down the void and been quite seriously injured. And the builder was being prosecuted for failing to ensure that that contractor had in place all the right safety arrangements. It wasn't the safety person in me, it wasn't the lawyer in me, it was just the ordinary person in the street that went, I don't get how that works. A specialist contractor has been engaged to do specialist work of high risk nature, of which they have total control over. They created the risk and their own worker was injured, and yet the builder is being prosecuted. And I went, it doesn't really pass the pub test. So, and I said that to the senior lawyer. I'm first year, absolutely know nothing lawyer. And I said, look, it just doesn't make sense. And he said, we better plead guilty. WorkSafe always win. They are pretty successful in Australia, I have to say. So they did plead guilty. Two young builders sitting there in the magistrate's court thinking they've fallen into bowels of hell, fined $15,000. But it really made me think about this question in relation to specialist contractors. And I was like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I started looking into it. The case law seemed to be saying, well, yeah, why were they being prosecuted? And the year following, we had a decision, Biata v. the Queen. Has anyone heard that decision? So Biata Poultry had been prosecuted by Victorian Work Cover Authority, found guilty at first instance, appealed to the Court of Appeal, found guilty again for the death of an independent truck driver, independent contractor, and they appealed to the High Court, and the High Court basically handed down a decision that affirmed to me that what I was thinking was correct, in that the Biata, as the principal contractor or principal contractors, were not responsible for the management of health and safety by contractors. And that just got me going, and I just went, this is an area of law that is massively misunderstood. As a safety professional, I started to realise it was having a really big impact on how we manage contractors as well, and really impacting on, I guess, the success of safety management in this space. And looking at the case law, but also developing, I suppose, an approach to how could we change the way that we are managing our contractor safety so that we improve contractor safety outcomes. In the work that John and I have done and the research that we've looked at, contractors continue to be one of the most injured, most frequently injured groups of workers, and not necessarily because of what they're doing, but because of the risks that are posed to them by their clients and the failure of clients to actually keep their contractors safe. That's, what I've looked at and what I've focused on, getting to grips with what does the law say. And I was saying to someone, I feel like you guys are kind of, and please take this the right way, but I feel like you're sort of back where I started having this conversation in Australia and started trying to turn the Titanic to go, it isn't what we think. But I think the lucky thing for you guys is I think you're going to move ahead a hell of a lot faster because you've got all this case law out of Australia, and because you've adopted our health and safety legal regime, that precedent law applies. And you've also had a couple of really good decisions here in recent times, one under the old legislation here, which still has the same principles. So I feel like you guys are going to actually leap forward a lot faster than we did, thank God. So we really need to unpack, what does the legislation say? What does it actually say, and what does it actually mean? I want us to take a step back and have a look at some of the really basic principles. So we have PCBUs, persons conducting businesses or undertakings. So we've got our PCBU. We have contractors, our PCBUs. And we've got, and I'll use the term principal contractor. You guys don't know how lucky you are you don't have our construction regulations, okay? In our construction regulations, principal contractors are defined and they have all these horrible things they have to do, and it creates all this confusion. But when we talk about principal contractors, in this sense, we're using it in the general sense, which is a person who hires a contractor to do work, okay? So we've got contractors are PCBUs and PCs are both PCs. So they both have that primary duty to manage safety, okay? Contractors are also workers of principal contractors, yeah? But that's where it starts to get all a bit confused. And what does that actually mean? What is the extent of the duty? So we know that the duty is to eliminate or reduce risk so far as is reasonably practicable, yes? Both contractors and PCs have that duty, but there is a qualifier under this duty which says, insofar as a PCBU influences, directs or controls a matter. That is critical in the contractor space. And people often don't see that. They just see contractors are workers, we owe duties to contractors in the same way as we do for our own workers, okay? So people go, oh, so that means I need to manage safety in respect to my contractors in the same way as I do my own employees or my own workers. That is not correct. It is a completely different relationship you have with your contractors. They are workers, but not in the same way as your own workers. What's the difference between contractors and your own workers? What is the difference? What makes the difference in the relationship? Anyone? The degree to which you control them. Who thinks you control how contractors do their work, or you have a responsibility over how a contractor does their work in terms of safety? Do you hand up? It's okay. Either, this is fantastic, so I can sit down now, because so often when I talk to groups, everyone says, oh yeah, I have obligations to ensure that contractors manage their safety, and I have control over how they do their work. Well, you don't. That's the reality. You don't have control over how contractors do their work. They do their own work. They control themselves. So what we need to do is think about our relationship with our contractor differently to our own workers, because we control our own workers. We tell them the when, where, how, what, and why, what work they're going to be doing. We don't do that with our contractors. We do control some things, and that's really where the duty kicks in. What do we control in relation to our contractors? So I hire a contractor to come onto a construction site and do their specialist work. What do I control? Sorry? What you pay. Okay, from a safety point of view, what do we control? Where they work? Oh, the scope of work. Yeah, sure, we give them a scope of work and we say, all right. And I'm going to use a good old age-old example, a crane operator. So we bring a crane operator and we say, I want that lifted and moved from there to there. So there's a scope of work. What else do we control about the contractor's work?
Site induction.
The site, absolutely. We control the site, how they're going to get on and off the site, what's going on the site, any site risks that might impact on that contractor, absolutely. Okay. Do we control how they do their work? What crane they use, how the lift they're going to do, the operator they use, the training of that operator. Do we control any of that? No. We might choose to, but we don't actually control it. So we have to first and foremost start thinking about our contractors differently. We have a side-by-side relationship with our contractors, not this. Okay, and that's the first shift that we need to make, is we don't control them, We don't tell them what to do in relation to their own work, but we do control safety factors that can impact on them. Okay? So the duty is to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the safety of workers. So what that actually means is the duty means you have to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the safety of contractors. That's what your duty is to ensure you don't injure them, not that they don't injure themselves. And that is a big, big shift, because unfortunately the majority of approaches to contractor safety management focus on what? Think about your own contractor safety management systems. What do they largely focus on?
Pre-qualification.
Pre-qualification, yeah.
Inspections.
Sorry?
Site inspections.
Doing site inspections, so going out, making sure your contractor's doing their work safely. Yeah. That is not actually focused on the safety of contractors from you. That is focused on the management of safety by contractors. And that is not a legal obligation. Okay, big move. So our safety management needs to focus on what are we doing that could injure our contractors and how are we managing that. Secondarily, consulting with contractors about what are they doing that could injure us and how is that being managed so that we are keeping our workplace safe. So really shifting how we understand how the legislation itself actually works. I have got a presentation, so I'm going to just move on with that. The jury is absolutely in Australia, and it is here too. There, you know, I've had this argument for a really long time with people about what the duty is and how it works and all the rest of it. And I'm just at the point now where I just go, there's no argument about how the duty works. It is not a legal obligation under the health and safety legislation for a principal contractor to ensure the compliance of contractors with the contractor's legal obligations under health and safety legislation. There's no doubt now, and even one of our toughest jurisdictions, New South Wales, I was saying to someone, there was a case handed down the other day, there's a couple of judges in New South Wales, who shall remain nameless, who have repeatedly handed down decisions that are problematic in Australia. And just recently, one of them handed down a decision, and there was a line in that decision and it said, the principal was entitled to rely upon the expertise of their contractor to manage the contractor's risk. Yay! And that's a big shift. So there's no doubt that there is an entitlement under the legislation for you to hire a contractor, bring them into your workplace and rely upon them to manage their own risks. Your obligation stems from how you can injure them. How do people feel about that? Are we okay with that? Good, that's great. These are a couple of, so that's the Bayada poultry case that really got me sort of looking at this in, 2012. And I think what's interesting about this, just because the principal has a legal right to issue instructions, so you can say, no, I want to tell my contractors how to manage certain things, or I'm going to be checking out their safe procedures, I'm going to be approving how they do their work. You can do all of that. That is a policy decision. It is not a legal obligation. Very different things. And there are reasons why a principal contractor might choose to take a degree of control over, or, take the microscope to their contractor safety arrangements. Why? What might be the motivators? People say, reputation, I don't want contractors associated with my business to be having lots of injuries, or, people talk about a moral obligation. I have struggled with that a little bit. And I did a webinar recently talking about whether there is a moral obligation to ensure that your contractors are managing their own safety. But in reality, that is a policy decision that an organisation can make. It is not, and it so has the legal right to issue instructions, and it is possible to take that step. It does not establish that it is a step which was reasonably practicable. And that's the test under the legislation. That's the performance you need to meet, which is your likelihood, your severity, your knowledge, your suitability and cost, so the elements of reasonable practicability. And the three things that the High Court talked about in Bayada were the knowledge. Who has the knowledge? So my example of the builders that rolled in to their legal firm back in 2010, who had the knowledge over the removal of the roof, how it was going to be done, managing voids, doing all that? So who had that knowledge, the builder or the contractor? Contractor, yep, okay. They also talked about suitability. Is it appropriate to be out there telling contractors how to do their work? This is, no, stop. I know you've been doing this for 20 years, but you're going to do it this way. And Stephen's Broderick was an interesting one. And I think that, you can imagine, you think to yourself, my partner's a plumber. And, he's like, people want to tell me how to do my job. And I think Stephen's supervision by a Broderick employee of the independent contractors while they're working could have been prescribed, but it might have been an irritating distraction. Here comes the bloody safety person. And contractors do get frustrated by clients wanting to tell them how to do their job. The other thing that concerns me about that as well is you're actually changing a method of work that a contractor is familiar with and knows how to do, and you're introducing uncertainty and potentially confusion, and a lot of research has been done about confusion over supervision. I'm a worker working for a contractor. Who do I answer to? Is it the site safety guy, or is it my own boss, or what's going on here? Fortescue Metals was another one, and this one reinforced the reliance. You retain an independent contractor, probably, arguably because they're skilled at what they do. We'd like to think so. And, really, I know people sort of say, oh, well, what if I know a contractor's not particularly good in safety, but, I have to hire them? Well, that would probably be because you're working in a remote area and there isn't anybody else. So that might be a time where you say, well, actually, I think I need to step in here. But my response is, if you don't have faith in your contractor in safety, you don't use them. Instead of saying, oh, well, I don't think you know what you're going to do, so I'm going to tell you how to do it, okay? You go, no, you're not on the books. And this one here, and overreach. People have heard the term overreach. It's becoming, more and more. And it's quite funny, actually. When I first started talking about this topic, people thought I was insane. They just thought she's got it all wrong, and that can't be how it works. But now it's quite nice. I hear my own words coming back to me after 15 years, which is quite good. But in the Waco case, Waco had employed another scaffolding company to come in and do some work. They weren't happy with their safety arrangements, so they issued them with safe work method statements. What happened to their control when they gave them the procedure and said, this is how you're going to do it? They just assumed a whole bunch of control, and within 2 days of issuing that safe work method statement, a worker was seriously injured, and Waco was prosecuted and also had to stump up $500,000 settlement in terms of damages. So, there are real consequences for this overreach, both legal and operational. And you guys have had some decisions as well here that reinforce, and I think this one here from the Department of Labor back in 2013, which was under your old legislation, but the underlying principles continue to remain in the new legislation. And I think the quote, Section 18, which is now your Section 36, cannot be intended to be a provision that in effect requires a principal to be an insurer in respect of compliance with statutory obligations by subcontractors. I really like that quote, because I think it very clearly says these contractors are PCBUs with primary duties that they are responsible for. The principal contractor is not responsible for confirming that that contractor is compliant. And that's a shift we need to make, okay? So I think that was a really important decision, and then you've had a couple of ones since. And with the adoption of the Australian model, you guys can leverage off all our precedent law. The other thing I say to people is, please, if you're going to look at case law, don't look at anything below your senior courts. District courts, lower courts can be a little bit all over shop in this space, and I call it false precedents. So we can get lower court decisions, less and less so, which is fantastic. That can muddy the waters, but always go to your higher court decisions to actually confirm what the principles are, because you might read some lower court decisions and go, oh, hang on a minute, what does that mean? And I know that this one here at the bottom, I can't say that. How do you say Fakari. And I know there's been a recent decision actually about a safety consultant that's actually looked at this work product versus work activity concept that was brought up in that case. But, you know, it really looked at that issue of influence and control. It's actual control. It's what you actually control, not what you take control over. So the law is clear. It really is clear. And that's such a relief, because now we can get on with saying, well, what does that mean we need to do? How can we practically make this work? And it's actually a really good news story, because it means that we can change our relationship with our contractors. We can, instead of being, you know, PC and contractor, it's literally a work side-by-side relationship. We need our contractors to understand that they are primary duty holders, that they will be held responsible for their own safety management, both from a regulatory point of view and from a client point of view, and change the way that we interact, and hopefully bring about better improvements in contractor safety outcomes, because what we've been doing isn't really working, because we've fallen down that rabbit hole of saying, oh, well, look, you know, I'm going to, and people talk about pre-qual all the time. So we need to change our perspective. We really need to change, and I always say we basically need to turn around our focus. Stop looking at your contractors so hard and start looking at yourself and saying, what is it, or how can we injure our contractors that we need to be addressing and managing? And the really nice thing about this is that's part of your core business. It's what you know. It's what you understand. It's what you have control over. So it's actually pretty easy. Whereas, and I find this always sort of fascinating, where, you know, we spend a whole lot of time looking at our contractors, which is not our core business, which is not something that we may be as familiar with, which is far more difficult to manage. So let's get back to, you know, focus on our own knitting and make sure that our safety management systems are robust. Change our focus, as I said. Think about, what are we actually focusing on? Contractor safety management traditionally has been pretty broad. So let's just really refocus what it is we're actually looking at. And change what we're actually doing in terms of safety. So change our perspective, change our focus, change our activities. So look at yourself. Use the mirror, turn that mirror around on yourself. And I said to Susan, a quote that I use is, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most dangerous of them all? Okay, and we really need to think about what it is that we do in our work that is creating risk. So rather than looking at everything our contractors are doing, so, you know, the number of times I've looked at pre-qualifications and inductions and so forth that are dealing with all sorts of obscure things in terms of our contractors. Actually, what we're interested in is where there is an overlap. Where do our contractors impact on us and our business, on the principal contractor's business, and where do we impact on theirs? That's all we're interested in. And I often see things like, you know, do you have a consultative committee? How do you consult with your workers? I'm not interested. I am interested in how we can impact each other, because that's where our duties lie. We have to not injure them and they have to not injure us. That's about as complex as it gets. Okay? So really think about the overlap where we're actually, and put all of your effort into that overlap. And don't worry about the periphery. And then thinking about changing our activities as well. So when we go through, and this is my 4-pillar model, there's nothing very interesting about the headings, the 4 elements. All of the people would be familiar with them. You know, we pre-qualify our contractors, we onboard them, we monitor them, and we review them. But so often we are looking in the wrong direction. Most of the time when we're doing those things, we are looking at what the contractor's doing. Would people agree with that, that most contractor safety management systems are assessing what the contractor's doing? Yes. Okay. So again, change that focus, change that perspective, and under each one of these headings, look at what we're actually doing to meet that focus. Oops. Change that perspective. The other thing as well that we need to think about is not all contractors are the same. Okay? And I've sort of come up with really, 4, but 3 categories of contractors that look at this issue of influence and control. Normally, and people, when we think about contractors, we tend to assess them and go, oh, I'm going to grade them according to the degree of risk that they bring to my business. So I'm going to go, okay, all my high-risk contractors that bring in critical risks, we're going to manage in this way. The low-risk contractors, we're going to manage this way, and so forth. Would that be fair to say? Yep, we kind of. What we really need to be doing is saying, actually, the first thing I need to think about is how much do I control my contractors? So think about it through that lens first, and then think about risk. And if we think about control, there's a couple of categories. So labour hire or integrated contractors, independent contractors, and then these are, you know, PCs or contractors with possession of site or possession of the work or full control of the work, however you want to. We have provisions in our regulations that enable appointment, formal legal appointment of principal contractors. And this is a sliding scale of control. How much control do you have over, so integrated labour, and it might be day labour. You know, you bring in from a labour hire company and they're there digging holes or whatever they're doing. How much control do you have over integrated labour? 100%. They basically come to you, they might be qualified, you might get qualified people in, but you are telling them the what, where, when and how of what they are going to be doing. So you have 100% of control. So if you think about the obligation to ensure supposed reason practicable, the safety of workers, in respect of matters you influence and control, you have all the same duties for integrated labour as you do for your own workers. Okay? So these people really are your worker in the true sense of the word. You have 100% control, so you need to make sure they are integrated within your safety management systems. Okay, at the other end of the scale, how much control do you... So this would be a situation where there's potentially a construction site and you've engaged another construction company to run the project for you. Or there's an area within a work site that is cordoned off, it's managed by them, they're doing all the work. How much control do you have over that contractor and their work, their methods of work, their safety management?
Minimal.
None. Pretty much none. You might, say for example there's a site and we go, and I had this happen, I worked on a manufacturing site and we had a fire and the fire was down here. So we had to rebuild this whole thing. We had a contractor here, but the contractor had to travel through our site to get to there. And this was a recycling facility. It was mobile plant everywhere, and it was, you know, quite dangerous. We had zero control within here, but we had some control over safe access, safe egress, that kind of thing within here. But really, within the actual work site itself, we had none. Okay? And look, in Australia, we do have a little provision that says, you know, you have to alert, an appointed principal contractor of any risks that you're aware of on the site that they're working on, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you don't have any control. The site has been handed over. They have 100% control. This one in the middle, this is interesting, because how does that work in control? Let's go back to our little Venn diagram. Well, how much control do we have over our independent contractors and their methods of work? Anyone?
Varies.
Sorry?
Varies.
Yeah, it varies. What makes it vary?
Depending on how much influence you want to impart.
That's a choice. That's a policy decision. Okay. But in fact, we each have 100% control over our own stuff. Okay? So the contractor, the independent contractor, controls their work methods, their safety management. We control our PC. PC controls our work methods. And it's where this overlap in the middle, I should have drawn it like that, that's where we have influence and control. So we have a term, shared health and safety duties. You would have the same term. I hate it. I really don't like it. What you have is concurrent. It's a side-by-side duty, okay? PC controls what they manage, and the contractor controls what they do, and you have to work together in the middle to consult and communicate about how that's going to come together. But you don't tell each other what to do, per se. You might have site rules that say, you're coming on our site, we have a site rule which says you're going to wear high-vis vests. That's fine, no problem, because that's how you're managing traffic management on your site, and you're informing the contractor of that. But in reality, this is a side-by-side model. So, and how we deal with each of these types of contractors in our 4-pillar model varies because of the degree of control and the sort of questions that we need to ask. So each of them, we pre-qual, we onboard, we monitor, and we review. Pre-qual, onboard, monitor, and review. Pre-qual, onboard, monitor, and review. The process is the same, but what we do is different because of the relationship that we have with these contractors. So once you've worked out the category of contractor that you have, then you can start to think about risk. Okay, and you go, oh, okay, we've got labour hire coming in. He's just going to be sweeping up around site. That could be very dangerous, actually. But, you know, we've got labour hire who are working in, you know, a very hazardous area. So we need to treat them perhaps differently to somebody who's doing, you know, admin work. And the same. But think about your category of contractor first, and then think about the degree of risk, because you have to deal with them differently in terms of how you go about doing each of the steps. Pre-qualification, it's a problem. Would we agree it's a problem? It's a problem. Traditionally, pre-qualification, I think it's what we're trying to make pre-qualification do that is the problem. And historically, what we've tried to do is use pre-qualification of an actual operational verification of safety management by contractors. Would that be true? To say, if I pre-qualify you and I get certain things from you, I can say that contractor's safe. Do we think that's true? Do you think there is a direct correlation between what your contractor has handed over to you in the pre-qual with their actual on-the-ground safety performance? No. Absolutely not. And I have to say, I've been doing this, you know, talking about this for 15 years, and that is the response 100% of the time. And yet we keep doing it. We keep doing it. And it isn't working. So pre-qual cannot assess operational safety. It can't. It's a point in time. It's documentation that is usually produced for the principal contractor, not for the contractor. It's to get the gig. It's to meet the tender requirements. It's to answer the questions in the RFQ. It's been prepared by the person in the office. It's never seen the light of day. Okay? So we really have to rethink what we're trying to do with a pre-qual. Why do we need to pre-qual? So we do need to do it, but if it can't assess operational safety and we're going to stop trying to make it do that, what is it trying to do then?
Meet the client's needs in some cases.
To do what? What is the client's need?
Principal contractor, a lot of their policies say you have to be pre-qualified to actually work on their site. So
Yeah.
to actually get that work,
Yeah.
you jump through the hoops.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what I was getting at there is, you know, the contractor is turning themselves into whatever shape you want them to be, which is, you know,
Because who holds the power is the
yeah, commercial.
PCB.
Yeah, yeah. So commercially, absolutely, you will do this or you won't get the gig. Do you want me to take a couple of questions now, or will we? Yeah, sure. There's a hand down. John. Yes, John.
Yeah, it's to justify the health and safety department of the business job.
We won't be that cynical. Okay, we won't be that cynical. But I must admit, sometimes I feel like I walk out of a meeting and the safety people are going, I think I just lost my job. In reality, what we're trying to do with pre-qual is demonstrate a degree of due diligence. We're trying to make some inquiries to, you know, kind of sort out the sheep from the goats. To say I want to feel like I've got some assurances from my contractors that they are managing safety. Well, let's just ask them the question and just get a yes or a no. Instead of the facade of give me all your documentation, okay? Just ask them and get a response. And then further into the relationship, ask for stuff when it's relevant, okay? And people say to me, but what if they lie? What if they say yes when it's really no? And I'm like, well, they're lying when they give you the piece of paper. It just takes more time and it's more expensive. Okay? So pre-qual is to establish your legal relationship. We are a PCBU, you are a PCBU, we have obligations to ensure we don't injure you, you have obligations to make sure you don't injure us. That's what we need to be saying. I spend quite a bit of time looking at contract clauses. Most of them need rejigging because most of them say you as a contractor will do everything we say, and that's a problem because, you know, the courts have also they look to the contract to say what was the relationship here. And people would have heard of the case McConnell-Dowell in Australia. So McConnell-Dowell, massive construction business, engaged Brady Marine, was a contractor to do some very specialised work. A subcontractor engaged by Brady Marine cut some headstocks that were on a barge. Those headstocks fell and killed someone. And McConnell-Dowell were prosecuted for, you know, failing to ensure that that risk was managed. In the ordinary circumstance of things, it would have been, we had an independent contractor, they were running the job, they were in control, they were doing everything. But McConnell had set the systems up in such a way that the contractors all fell under the hierarchy of McConnell-Dowell in terms of control. Their contracts, repeatedly, you will do everything we say, you will submit everything to us for approval, you will, and this control just ballooned. And so they were effectively found guilty. But yeah, so we want to establish our legal relationship. We want to confirm the obligations of the parties. We want our contractor to go, okay, I get it. I am a PCBU with primary duties. I am responsible for managing the safety of my workers and any others who could be impacted by my work. And I agree to that. And I go, yep, I get it. And it's very clear that they understand that obligation. Clarifying operational, and what your pre-qual does is it should set you up for your engagement throughout the contract. So you ask them questions about, essentially, have you identified and controlled risks so far as is reasonably practicable? And they go, yes, or we do. We have incident response. We have identified our critical risks. We target all our questions, and they go, yes, we do, yes, we do, yes, we do. Well, they've just drawn a line in the sand for you to go, okay, as we engage throughout the relationship, they are the sort of things that I could monitor or assess as we go through. Okay? You set your expectations. There is total clarity around what they should have in place. Now, the other thing I was chatting before, we need to think about how we ask our questions. Training is a really interesting one, and I often see questions in pre-quals around, well, really competence is the question. So, do you have a training register? Do you use an RTO? Do you refresh training? Blah, blah, blah. All of those questions are process questions. What don't they tell me? What am I trying to, with all those questions, what am I really trying to get to? I want to know if, what? Competent. I want to know, are you and your workers competent to do the work they've been engaged to do? That's the only question I need to ask. I don't need to ask about training registers, licence registers, refreshers, RTOs. I don't need to know any of that. I just need confirmation that they are competent and their workers are competent to do their work. That's it, one question. And it's interesting, if you look at the legislation, it's performance-based legislation. It's not prescriptive. We know there are codes and regs that go into more detail. But basically the premise is, here's the performance you need to meet. You go and work out how you're going to do it. And that's what we want to reflect in our pre-qual. Ask a question that says, this is the performance you need to meet. How you're going to do it is up to you. And it obtains initial assurance of safety expectations. So they're saying, yes, we do all these things. So what you can do is shrink your pre-qual down to a 20-minute exercise. So we say, right, here's the questionnaire, answer it, yes, and you have a little, legal thing at the end that says, this is true, and if it's not true, I'm liable for damages. Takes them 20 minutes to complete it and us 20 minutes to check it, and that's it. Okay? So really changing what we're trying to make our pre-qual do. And challenging, these myths around, but if you can give me a written safety management system, that's going to be evidence of safety management on the ground. And then onboarding, same deal. We need to change, I shouldn't have rubbed off my categories actually. We need to think about our different contractor categories for onboarding because they're different. We need to deliver different information. But what's the focus of onboarding? So now we know that our obligations are about keeping our contractors safe from us, not keeping them safe from themselves. What should our onboarding focus on?
Maybe risk information sharing, like, this risk that you might not be aware of, so
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So this is where, we share information with each other about what our risks are and how those risks are controlled, so that your contractor understands the context they're coming to, what risks that may be posed to them, what risks they need to take into account when they're doing their work. I'm coming on to do hot work. I'm going into a hazardous environment, you know, with dangerous goods. What does that mean for the work I'm going to be doing? So that's the two things, is what risks are they going to face? How do we manage them so that they can stay safe, but also what do they need to take into account when designing their own risks? It's quite funny, in Australia we had the WHS regulations for mines introduced in WA in 2022. And the regulations, that's all they ask, is that the mine tell the contractor about principal mining hazards and how those are controlled at the mine site, and get information back from the contractor about how the contractor is going to respond to those risks. Beautiful, beautiful, it's perfect. I can tell you the mishmash that has gone on because of this constant desire to say, oh, no, I now need to know every in and out of what my contractor is going to do. I need to know how they're managing manual handling. I need to know how they're doing. It's just crazy. It is no more complicated than that. You know, it's pretty simple. And that is managing your safety liability. That's the point. And I actually think onboarding is probably the most critical point of contractor safety management. And yet, we spend probably 80% of our time in the pre-qual space. Let's spend 10% of our time there. Let's spend 80% of our time in the onboarding, because that's the sharing of information that will bring about safety improvements. So yeah, share information about risk posed by contractor and principal contractor work and how it will be controlled so you don't, within that overlap. Establish cooperation and consultation arrangements. How are we going to share information going forward? The reality is contractors are also very vulnerable in workplaces because they're not kept up to date with changes. We've changed the traffic management plan today, or we're getting, you know, this specialist work is being done today and we haven't informed our contractors. And it should be continuous, ongoing. Onboarding should not assume control over contractors' safety arrangements. It's not, okay, this is now how you're going to do your work. It's, we're sharing information about risk, we're sharing information about how we're going to control those risks and how you can stay safe on our site. And monitoring. So have confidence in contractor safety management. I look at that statement and I sort of go, oh, how do people read that? Do you read it as, oh, this is the point at which I look at my contractors? Is that, I sort of read it and go, it almost sounds like have confidence in how contractors are managing safety. Okay? The reality is, what should we be monitoring first and foremost? How we are managing safety. Okay? So rather than going out with a checklist and saying, okay, right, I'm here now, you've said you're going to do this, are you doing this? And looking at them, again, flip that mirror and say, are we managing the risks that we pose to our contractors? Are we making their job harder? Contractors work around their clients' stuff all the time. You know, things are not as described. You know, the drop-off area is not in the location it was meant to be in, or staff are parking in the staging area or whatever. You know, we make our contractors' life more difficult often. So it's a cooperative process designed to identify issues and encourage collaboration and cooperation to manage risks. Again, side by side, we have to manage our stuff, you have to manage your stuff. What issues can you tell us about that we're making it hard for you to be safe? You know, what issues do we need to tell you about? Both contractors and principal contractors must monitor themselves and each other. So look at yourself and then look at them. Monitoring is not a one-way checklist, and yet that's how it is done, particularly in the construction industry, most of the time. Come out with my checklist and I'm going to work my way through it, and no, turn that mirror around, look at ourselves first. And then the last thing, which happens pretty rarely, is actual performance review. going back and saying, how did that go? And it's very uncommon for it to actually happen in fast-moving workplaces. But really trying to take a point in time and go back and go, okay, how did we go? Demonstration of ongoing due diligence and a two-way street encouraging feedback from both contractors and principal contractors. Does that happen now? Or is it pretty much us saying you had 5 LTIs and this and this and this, and giving them feedback? Is it mainly about giving contractors feedback rather than this two-way thing? Yeah? Yeah. And that is the traditional approach because, we take this hierarchical thing. I'm up here, you're down there, and I'm going to tell you how it is. We have to change that relationship. It's not a one-way street or rely on lag indicators as the sole measure of performance. We could have a whole 3-hour session about lag indicators and the problems of it in a contractor space. If we think they're problematic in normal worker, as a measure of worker safety for your own employees, they're 10 times worse in the contractor space. Okay? So really using the 4 elements, as I said, there's nothing new in the headings. It's what you're doing within each one that is specific to the contractor space. And within your categories, so labour hire, independent contractors, and your PC with possession. So in labour hire, if we're going out and doing monitoring, these workers are integrated into our safety management system, so we absolutely are looking for compliance with our safety arrangements. By contrast, if we're going out and doing monitoring of our independent contractors, we're not primarily looking for compliance with their own systems. We're looking for their compliance with any systems we may have implemented. So, simple example, we have high-vis vests at our site. Are our independent contractors wearing them? Okay? And we are monitoring how we can impact on our contractors and so forth. So again, we have that separation. And whereas the independent, this PC model here is, well, we would have more of a governance arrangement. Okay, and not so much necessarily, day-to-day inspections, but more of a governance arrangement because they are the ones that are fully in control. So thinking about your 4 pillars, but through this control model. So you've got a way of dealing with all the different contractors that you use. So I guess the takeouts are, 1, the law is settled. You are absolutely entitled to, actually I'm going to phrase it differently. So your primary obligation is to make sure your contractors are kept safe on your site from you. You don't have a legal obligation to ensure that your contractor complies with their obligations under the legislation. But we make policy decisions to ensure that our contractors, we may make policy decisions around how much we engage with our contractors, particularly around critical risk. We don't want contractors to, be fatally injured or seriously injured on our sites, so we may engage with them about their critical risks. We definitely will engage with them about risks they are importing into our workplace in terms of being and again, critical risks that can impact on our workers, but it is a consultation relationship. And when we think about our contractors, think about them through a paradigm of control first and respond accordingly. We ask different questions in our prequals. We onboard differently, we monitor them differently, and we performance review them differently for each different type of contractor. But it's fundamentally revisiting our relationship with our contractors.
So it's sort of more of a debate that we're having, and I raised it as to the lack of a mention of the owner as a PCPU and just how that sort of dynamic was playing out. It seems a bit of a change to me, but not a health and safety.
So when you say owner, do you mean like say a residential setting? Is that what you mean?
I'm on a large infrastructure project, so a government agency is
Yep.
and
Okay, so the owner of the work, and this is how they define it in Australia in our construction regs. So the owner of a construction project is the principal contractor unless they engage another contractor to run it for them. Okay, so in that situation, the government agency is the client or the owner of the work, but they engage another construction company to do the work. Am I right? Yeah. Okay, so in that situation, the owner is a PCBU, right? But remember, their obligations, their duty as a PCBU is narrowed by reasonable practicability and influence and control. So that government agency, how much influence and control do they have over the day-to-day safety management on that project?
They set the environment.
Pardon?
They set the environment.
Well, do they?
Particularly financial environment.
Okay, let's not, this is safety. Well, it does, and it's an interesting point you make because we don't in health and safety, people might be familiar with the heavy vehicle national law in Australia. There is a mechanism within that law that upstream and downstream parties can be held responsible for business practices that result in the unsafe operation of a truck. We don't actually have a concurrent trigger in WHS like that. So if you underpay a contractor which drives them into unsafe behaviour, there's no mechanism really to actually go after that. But to your point, so the government agency is the owner of the work. They are a PCBU, but they pretty much have no influence or control over how the work is done. Okay? They have, so from a health and safety prosecution point of view or from a liability point of view, it's pretty much zero. It's a policy decision for government agencies, and you'll be hearing from the Defence Force. This is a choice that governments make to say, we want to be exemplar, okay? And we had this I worked for WorkSafe Victoria, and we had government as exemplar. The problem we get, though, is that you get government agencies who meddle in what their construction projects do. And that actually make life much more difficult and complex. And so we need to strike that balance, which is what I was saying about this PC model at the end here, where you've got another company acting as the actual construction principal contractor, and then you've got your government agency up here. This agency needs to engage here on a governance level to say, what are the safety KPI we are expecting you to meet? They should not be jumping over the top and coming in and meddling in the day-to-day management of safety. And from a liability point of view, almost none. Okay? Reputationally terrible, all that kind of stuff, but they're policy issues, they're not legal issues. Does that? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, hang on, there's just one here. Oh, did you want to just finish on that? Sorry, I'll just get there. Did you want to make a comment on that, Fiona?
Just stand up.
Stand up.
In our tape was discussing this when we were looking at what you were talking about and what the student was asking you about. We sometimes get ourselves a little bit confused about who's responsible for what. Is when it's not quite so regular as an individual principal contractor. We have a lot of alliance contracts that we work on. We've got a couple of our alliance members here or joint ventures.
Yep.
So it's not one principal contractor, and where it's easy for us is in the alliances, we're actually a member of those alliances as well. And that makes it a little bit more challenging. So you have to sort of help in those two roles of where you've got us in our instance as the owner, but we're part of that alliance.
It's still...
Principals who are working as a joint.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. I was just involved in a matter recently that unpacked this very issue. Joint ventures they're not actually even a legal entity. They are just a commercial arrangement to facilitate a project, okay? So, and I spoke to my friend at WorkSafe and he said, if there's an issue, it's even really difficult for the regulator to work out who to prosecute because there is no entity. And what it comes down to is who had management and control of the matters that were involved in the breach. Okay? So really, again, as a JV, so you've got your agency and another commercial entity coming together to make a commercial arrangement. You then hire another construction company to do the work. It's these guys that have the liability, not here.
Sometimes we hire two of them to do it.
Yeah, so they have to, so they each get part of the work or something like that? But are they doing the work together operationally? Okay. It all comes down to, and you get quite good at this actually, you start to be able to look at who has management control of what. So you got two construction companies. They're not going to be doing the same thing at the same time because that just wouldn't work. They're going to be doing different things in an operational sense. Okay. Sorry? Okay. So again, you go, okay, well, if a worker was injured, who was the employer? Who was directing that worker in their work? Who was providing their gear? Who provided the training? That's who has the responsibility. It's the nice thing about safety is it's pretty operational. That's the lens we have to look through. Who created the risk? Who controlled the worker? So that's the party that is going to be responsible. All right? Sorry.
Great questions, great discussion. We've got morning tea now. Now, those of you that are sitting on questions, hold on to those questions.